summertime at the barn working off riding horses. Went to college with the intention that I was going to be a jockey. So I picked going to University of Kentucky and thought that, that would be my into the racing industry. And just by just getting to Lexington, I could, bust my way in and become the first female jockey who's going to win the Triple Crown, blah, 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 blah. So clearly it didn't happen. I got to Kentucky and discovered that it's really quite a hard career and you really have to starve yourself. And I really had no interest in, giving up chocolate. So at that point I was like, well, what do I do now? Halfway through an equine science degree and I still don't have my own horse and I have never owned a horse and I still would like to do that. So at that point, I'd kind of been dabbling with eventing in Texas, but San Antonio is not a big hotbed for eventing. I don't know if any of you all know that, but it's really not.
I'm from Austin, so.
You're from where?
Austin.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, about the same. Yeah. Basically nothing. So, I'd found an instructor and we'd gone to a couple of events, but everything was like 6 hours plus away. So it was really difficult. And, but now I was in Kentucky. I rode at Champaign Run, actually. They have a farm that they also, it's like a farm that runs the event, but they have another farm. And while I was there, I finally earned enough money to buy my own horse, 5-year-old thoroughbred off the track. And I was like, okay, I've got my equine science degree. Now what? I didn't know, so I decided to become a working student. I moved out to Maryland and worked for Natalie Hollis. She's now at Destination Eventing, and I think a lot of people might know of her. She was at a different place at that time, and I thought I was going to cut it and, go all advanced, blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, my horse fell into a lake, like within maybe a couple weeks of being there, and he developed a huge water fear.
Wait.
Yeah, so we were on the side of a lake farm,
I know what you're
talking. Cold water in the lake, and my horse had a fear of water, but his way of conquering it was like charging forward into the water. So I would say fell as it was more like charged deeper and deeper until the next thing you know, we were swimming. And I thought I was a pretty good swimmer, but I don't know if anyone's ever swum in a helmet and boots, but it's a lot harder. So at some point I just gave up trying to get him back to the shore and floated so I could catch my breath. Horse went back to the shore and lunged out of the water and impaled himself in his chest, 5 inches into his chest on a branch. So that was cool. Yeah, so then he had a fear of water and that took a while. Anyways, main point is after 6 months of him stopping at every single water, 20 strides away, I was like, I can't cut this. I can't cut it as a working student. I'm not cut out for this life. At that point, my parents were like, cool. So will you please go back to school and, become something that will make money? And I was like, I guess. So I moved back to Texas, this time to Dallas. I rode with Mike Huber for 4 years, and he was based in Dallas. He was a pretty big Area 5. He was basically the big guy in Area 5 for many, many, many years. And I went to North Texas and got my mechanical engineering degree. And during that time with Mike, that same horse who was terrified of water, got over it and we moved up to advanced. We moved up to horse. I don't think we did any 4-star shorts while we were there, but we moved up to advanced. We did quite a few. We did a couple of 3-star L's. I got spun at all of them. I couldn't keep my horse down there, but I didn't really know any better. I think a lot of us, your first horse, you don't really know what you're doing. And I thought I was doing the best I could by him, but, you learn a lot more in retrospect that what you could do differently. So I graduated with that mechanical engineering degree in 2012, moved to DC area, lived in Middleburg for 2 years, worked for a contracting company as an APM. I was I chose to live in Middleburg because could be at any job site, even though my job was in Alexandria. So I ended up at a job site in Southern Maryland. I would get up at 5:30 a.m., drive to the job site, come home, and then I would go ride after work. I mean, this is DC, so the commute's like 2.5 hours in the afternoon, which is awesome. After 2 years of that, I was like, I cannot do this anymore. Just the commute is killing me. So at that point, my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time. He was in medical school. He got matched to Hackensack, he got matched to Hahnemann, which is at Drexel University in Philadelphia. So at that point, I moved to Philadelphia, and I finally got a job in engineering, which is like what I really wanted to do. And worked for a company downtown for a couple years. I rode with Missy Ranzehausen and would commute from my job out to the city, out to the Chester County area. So that was like a 45-minute drive. I wasn't able to do it every day at that point. Especially my company was not super into that work-life balance concept. And they also were not into the idea of young engineers getting any sort of leeway about their flexibility in their times, despite being told differently when I got hired. We parted ways after a couple of years. I left, but I think they were happy to see the backside of me. And I found another job out in the suburbs, and I've actually been with them ever since. That was in end of 2016, and I've just found a company that like fit culturally and really allowed me to, even though they said they didn't have they had set hours and you had to be, they actually were way more flexible once you got right down to it. And I've been able to balance writing for the past 7 years while I've been there, including writing at the 4-star short level. I didn't quite get so long due to my horse's soundness limitations. And then I got my current horse. I've gotten him up to 2-star L. I bought him in second off the track thoroughbred because I really like those thoroughbreds. I bought him in 2016, and he's just been a slow duck to develop. And he's had some injury. He's had a pretty big injury, a pretty big accident that in 2020. Right after the pandemic started in June, he stuck his leg through his stall window, those grates, and the fire department had to cut him out. He opened his leg to his tendon sheath, but I mean, quite frankly, we were just relieved he hadn't broken his legs. He went to New Bolton and had surgery, and was there for 30 days because the wound wouldn't close. So he was just the tendon sheath was just open. So that was an expensive mistake. And I had found out I was pregnant the day before he got hurt. So we went from me being like, well, at least I have my horse. I can't go to restaurants. I can't drink. I can't travel. I can't do anything I want to do, but at least I've got my horse, to, well, now what? And, no one really knew whether he was going to be sound or not. And he's actually slowly come back. I had my baby. He went to rehab while I had my baby. And, we kind of came back together just really slowly. I had to make some changes at that point. I've been riding with Matt Brown for almost 4 years at that point. He was fantastic, but he was 45-minute drive from me. And he was an hour from my office. And I was like, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it with my kid. Like, I need to be able to have my horse closer. So I've moved my horse. He's now within 15 minutes of my house. I don't have a trainer, but I do have a phenomenal boarding facility. It's full service. So they actually will tack the horse up for me. Obviously, I pay for that privilege. But I'm lucky to be at a place in my career now where I can do that. And it's really the only way that I've made it work. So I think really what I've kind of done over the time is just, when I didn't have money, I sacrificed time. I sacrificed driving. I sacrificed gas money. I sacrificed whatever I could, free time, anything to make it work. Now that I'm a little bit more established in my career, I find ways to make it work. Like, usually, paying other people to ride my horse, for a long time with the full service training. And now the commute became too long. I couldn't ride my horse almost at all. So once it became too much of a balance, I now, went towards the full service boarding facility. Anyways, that's Oh, and I forgot to mention this, but someone will kill me if I don't say this. But I worked in 2014. I started working for Eventing Nation too, just to make everything a little bit more complicated. I was the data guru. I have hundreds and thousands of cells of spreadsheet information on pretty much every rider, not pretty much every single rider in the U.S. and probably most of them worldwide from that time period between 20, I think I had data from 2012 through 2021. When I had my baby, I had to give it up. I just couldn't do everything anymore.
Yeah. I do want to circle back and ask you about that, like towards the end after we actually talk about people's questions, because I think that's very interesting. And for myself, especially,
it wounds my soul that all of that data is just sitting there, but I can't. It was such a time suck. So unfortunately, that was one of the things I
know that data is a time suck. I'm very aware of that. Okay, so I have a couple from your intro. I already have a couple questions. So we actually worked for the same person, which I didn't even know until a few months ago when you had said something. I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know that. We had worked for the same person, but I'm always curious when I see people like me who were working students that didn't pursue a professional career. Why did you not pursue a professional career as a rider?
I got to the point where I didn't even want to see my horse. I just, like, working was so hard all day, such long hours. There was tons at the place we were at, and I don't blame, this is not at all a reflection of Natalie. She was wonderful, but the culture there, and that was fostered by the barn owner, who was not Natalie, was very gossipy, and you just never got out of it. Of course, I succumbed to it too. So it was just like a mean girls club. I couldn't emotionally handle it. I couldn't physically handle it. I was getting sick all the time. I never got sick. And then worst of all, I didn't want to ride. I didn't want to ride my horse on my day off. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to do anything with him. And I loved that horse. So I didn't want to get to a point where I resented my own horse for making me do something that I didn't want to do. I wanted to want to ride. So at that point I was like, I'm not tough enough for this. I need a cushy office job. Yeah. And I wanted to make enough money to survive. I just didn't see my future as a long-term commitment to the sport like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it takes a lot of emotional maturity, especially at a young age, to recognize that. Because I think, a lot of people just try to push through and end up getting burned out. And that's a little more sad,
It's a tough decision because I think, especially our generation, we were really taught, like, you can have everything. And the problem is that I think we've all realized, no, you can't have everything. You have to make choices. There's only a limited amount of time or money in the world that you get. And so you're going to have to make choices. I think really what the reality is like, you can do anything, but you have to pick something. And there will always be periods in your life where you can try to juggle as many things as possible, but there becomes like a hard line where you're like, okay, like at this point in my life, I need to narrow things down. I need to go from 5 things going on to 4. And so you've got to drop something off. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, riding does end up getting dropped off. But for others, they just can't bear it, and they go at it for full force, and they become a pro,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I have one other. So you ended up in Philly, which is pretty much a hotbed or near hotbed area for eventing. When you guys were picking, did you get to pick where to live? When you were narrowing it down, did being close to the eventing scene weigh into your decision for where to live?
So we didn't get to pick. It's like my husband is a doctor, and so he was a family medicine doctor, so we don't make, we're comfortable, but he's not a surgeon,
Right.
sadly. Shh, don't tell him. But like the medicine thing is they have to go through something called a match, and so they basically rank. They go on a bunch of interviews after like their final year of med school, and then they rank which place they want to be at for their residency, and then the residency ranks them, and then on match day, this is like a nationwide database, and on match day, like everything's put into the pot, and then it's basically like boop, 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 generated, and you're going to X place. So they figure out, this computer figures out the most optimal, I guess, locations for everyone based off everyone's choices. Yes, I would say that where he interviewed had some pretty heavy implications. I was told him I'm not going back to Texas. Like, I love the state, but I hate the heat. I hate the humidity. I am allergic to mountain cedar, which is heavy in Austin and San Antonio. I love Austin so much, but I cannot live there. And I don't love Dallas that much. So I was just like, we cannot go back. I'm sorry. It kind of broke his heart. He's a UT grad. He and I grew up together in San Antonio. So like it broke his heart a little bit to not go back to Austin where he was living when we started dating. But yeah, he loves me enough. I've been riding horses since I was 10, and I've known him since I was 12. And so horses supersede him, and he knew that from the time he was 12, even though we didn't start dating until we were like 24 or something. So he knew what he was getting into. And luckily, he loves me enough that he looked pretty exclusively on the East Coast for interviews. I think he ranked Greenville, South Carolina, like second, so that he ranked Philly first, and then by my urging. And he ranked Greenville second, which I was thinking Aiken wouldn't be so bad. But I think Tallahassee was in there somewhere, but that wouldn't have been as ideal.
Yeah.
So that did play into it. I mean, I don't know how I could make things work to some extent in other areas. I don't know that I could have competed at advanced or 4-star while being a professional. I don't know that I could have continued to ride at the level I'm at. I think in terms of coaching, it becomes really difficult once you're an amateur who's done 4-star. It does become a little bit difficult to find a coach that understands that yes, you've been there, but you also might have holes, but you're not what you might think of as a typical amateur either. And in fact, in some cases might have more experience than that person. At least at a higher level, but maybe not like your experiences with one horse going up to the top was very narrow and it's not very broad, whereas theirs may be very broad. It just becomes a little bit of an odder dynamic. So that plays into it too. Yeah.
So walk us through what like a typical week would look like for you when your horse is there and it's kind of nearing show season or in show season. Like what does your life kind of turn into?
So last year was the first year I actually got to compete after having the baby, and my horse recovered from his injury. We took a really long time to get him back. Like I spent literally a year and a half trotting and cantering. And once it sort of got full tilt, I was like, let's test the waters out. So it was about 2 years after the injury in June of 2020, I competed him novice again. So this was his first event from the last one had been Ocala of 2019 Ocala Jockey Club. And I found myself really just kind of competing throughout the season. So I didn't plan it out too far ahead. Even the week before the show, I really didn't get too hung up on like, okay, I have to do this day, this day. I would, let's see, Mondays were the barn's day off. So I would go out, and after work, my husband would pick the baby up and watch her. No, I say watch her. He would parent her after work. Tuesdays, he works late. So it's always easy for me to be like, okay, Mondays are my day, and then Tuesdays are your day. And the biggest key, and please God, no one better know anyone I know at work, but um, because both live and work within 15 minutes of the barn, on like Tuesdays through Fridays, if I go ride, what I'll do is I'll leave at 11:45 from work. I'll go to the barn, I change clothes. They've tacked them up for me at noon, and I get on and I ride 20 to 25 minutes, and then I'm off and I'm headed home to work from home, or I'm headed back to the office, depending on how sweaty I am. So in the summer, this was home. So, a day would consist of me getting up, getting the baby ready. While my husband gets ready, then he takes her to daycare. I go to work. I go to the barn, ride during the day. That's the key. And then I can go on my merry way on the afternoon. It usually creates a lunch hour of about an hour and a half for me. But I've been lucky that the pandemic kind of broke everyone's brain about like where everyone needs to be and when. So I've had the flexibility. I keep my phone on. I respond to messages while I'm driving, and also occasionally on the horse. I've taken calls on the horse, but at 20 to 25 minutes, it's during lunchtime, so it's usually pretty quiet. And then I'm on, I drive home and work from home for the rest of the afternoon, and then my husband picks my daughter up on the way home from work because she's on the way to and from his work. Although she is very close to our house, so it's not a huge deal. But yeah, he does usually do that. And then we both feed her and put her down for bed and do whatever. And sometimes I have to work late. Like sometimes I'm now picking up work after she's done, busting out my computer and finishing up a project that I have to get out the door. But it's worked really well for the last year and a half, and I've actually gotten promoted since having the baby and since having the horse. So clearly something is going well.
Yeah. So we had somebody in the chat ask, how do you deal with winter since Philly is wet and frozen? It's coming from an Alabama person. Do you send your horse south?
So I actually have done both. This winter, my horse is south. He's spending the winter with Stephanie Kaufman. And that is because last winter, I don't have an indoor. That's the biggest thing. I don't have access to an indoor, and I don't have access to a lighted ring. So in the winter, I can't ride early in the morning or late in the evening because there's just no light. It's dark from the time I get to work. It's dark from like 8 to 4 at the shortest part of the year. So I had to ride during the day. The warmest part of the day, even at the warmest part of the day, our ring was frozen. Our ring was frozen basically last year from January through early March, maybe even some of December. It was frozen a lot of the time. So I just walked up and down the driveway. I listened to podcasts, and I just spent most of the winter walking my horse. I think it did him a lot of good in terms of his brain. Again, this was back, like he was really just recovering from an injury. He had been jumping, but not a ton. And it really was just like a time for me to reset. We worked on connection. We worked on leg yields. We worked on responsiveness. But it was on the driveway. It was safe. It was plowed. It was ice. But that was about it. I did some hacking when it was safe, but once it got to frozen, it just wasn't. We are also really lucky that we're on the backside of this wildlife preserve that we can hack, but there's a ton of like very steep hills, which is great when you can hack up them, but when it gets icy, it's not worth it. So that was one thing, is I had to be really patient then in the spring because I couldn't just go out, and I couldn't go to the March events. I couldn't go to the April events. I couldn't go to the May events. I had to spend April and May fitting my horse up really and getting him ready to go out in public. And then in June, I was finally able to go to an event early in June. And that was just a novice event. He's obviously he's a prelim horse and he's a thoroughbred. So fitness wasn't a huge concern. That was part of it as well. This year, because of last year, I sent my horse south. And of course, it's been a super warm winter, and I probably could have been competing at March events. But, you just gamble sometimes. And it has been really, really nice this year to spend more time with my daughter and my husband. That's the other thing, is when I send my horse off, the compromise is I don't ride, but I get more time with my family, and my family, I get to not divorce my husband because he gets to spend time with me. So again, this goes back to like, you can't do everything, but sometimes, like maybe sometimes you can compromise, and if you can take, it's nice to not have to ride in the winter sometimes. And I'm old enough now that I'm like, yeah, I can tough it out, and I do like the cold to some extent, but I also don't have to.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I have a question. So, how have your feelings towards competition and riding changed between the different phases of your life?
It's funny because I was never driven to young riders, but I didn't even have a horse till I was 21. So I don't want to say I'm not competitive. I am competitive, and I wish I had a horse that could take me to Burley, take me to Badminton, take me to the Olympics. But I've also always been fairly realistic about what I have and what I can achieve, and try to see what kind of satisfaction I can get out of what I have at the moment. My last horse was amazing, the 4-star horse. He was amazing cross country, but he was tough show jumping, and he was tough on the flat. And I was last after dressage almost every time I competed. And it came down to the fact, like, would I rather go and do, or would I rather sell him and like maybe get something younger and nicer, and maybe I can win prelim, but maybe that horse is like tapped out there. Maybe he's like mentally like, I'm done here. And I wanted to go and do, so I went and did. With this horse, this current horse, like he's much more talented and he's much more mentally there. And so to some extent, my competitive nature is becoming a bit more engaged, because it is harder for me to compete at an intermediate and advanced with the fitness requirements for him.
Yeah.
It's not impossible because he's a very naturally fit thoroughbred. I did like 2 gallops for the Ocala 2-star L, and he was overly fit. So, he's actually one of those horses who he looks like an endurance horse. He runs like an endurance horse. He could go. He doesn't need much for fitness, and I think it's possible for me to compete in intermediate and advanced. But you know what? Like, I don't think. I'd like to learn how to be competitive at prelim with him. So my goals have changed with him, but that doesn't mean I'm disappointed when I'm not competitive. I try to make very specific goals for myself, compared to my previous performances, rather than trying to compare myself to other riders, because I compete in the pro divisions. After prelim, there's really nothing to do. There's no amateur, there's no junior, I guess occasionally there is, but like I wasn't a junior. So I had to compete against the pros, and I was always last. So, you kind of get used to it. And I don't want to say you get used to it in a bad way, but like you just accept that, like, hey, if I want to compete at this level with this horse, like this might be where I'm at. I'm always going to try to get better than where I am previously, but this current horse, I'd like to learn how to win on. And he's got the movement for it. He should be able to do it. I just need to figure it out. And in terms of competing, I want to compete so bad. I will say that I spent most of 2020 crying. I was pregnant. My horse was, God knows if he was ever going to be sound again. I just dropped $20,000 into his surgery and his vet bills. And he was a year plus out, and I knew that once I had my baby, my life was going to be significantly harder to ride. So to me, it really felt like there was a death of some sort, like a death of what I could do. Oh, and I remember the day that the FEI increased the requirements to do a 4L by making you do 2 3Ls, and I was just like, I'm never going to get there. With being an amateur, you have, I think one of the biggest challenges, you have limited vacation time. And one thing that pros do not seem to understand is how limited it really is. They think, I've been asked a lot, like, well, why don't you just take unpaid time? And I'm like, that's not a thing. Yeah. That's not something that most companies, at least in my industry, are able to give you. So I know every person I know who is a pro, is an amateur, a working amateur, who has a salaried job, an office job, a more traditional job rather than like, I mean, I've seen vets compete at the top. I've seen nurses, you know, people in medical industry with more like shift work or like they own their own practice or that kind of thing. It's much easier to get the time you need both on a daily basis and a yearly basis to figure things out. You can work hard at other times to make up for that time. It doesn't work like that on salary. So I had to sort of come around to the idea that like I'm not going to get there. I couldn't do enough long formats to probably ever get to 5-star at this point. And that's kind of been through the, you know, the schedules on the events are longer. You can't do a long format in 3 days. It's 5 now. Minimum. You got to travel a day on each side at least.
Yeah.
And so it comes down to you can basically do 1 a year, and it just, you know, your horse ages out. The soundness issues. It's just really hard to do.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, like my competition goals have definitely changed. I've always wanted to do a 5-star. I still want to do a 5-star, but I've really had to learn. I went to therapy and like it sort of learned to just like, I kind of went through the grieving process of like accepting that like maybe I'm not going to do a 5-star, you know, and that's just that.
Yeah.
So that was tough. That was really tough.
I think a lot of people can probably identify with that. You know, there's a point where you realize that maybe the dreams you had as a kid just might not happen.
It felt like a grief. Like it felt like letting the person who I thought I was going to be go. You know, like I was like, I'm not going to be who I am anymore. Like the person who I am is gone.
Right.
So it was very, I mean, and obviously 2020 sucked for everyone in some kind of capacity. You know, I hate to say like, okay, like I was very privileged to be able to just work from home and be safe and not lose my job. And in fact, like get, you know, promotions and that kind of thing. But there was a lot of change going on as well due to like what was going on. And, you know, I think every amateur, unfortunately, the choice once you are an amateur is you do have to start to accept what can be. And I don't want to say you can't have it all, but it is like depending on your career path or depending on your flexibility or depending on whether you want to have a family, like there are choices you have to make that may limit you from doing what you ultimately want to do.
Right. Yeah. No, that's very true. That's very true. I always think like, you know, within my friend group, which is mostly amateurs within, you know, the 30s to mid 40s range, like all of us have such different lives, but we somehow make the horses work in our own way. So it's like, it's neat that we have different ways we can do it, but they look very different depending on the life we've kind of all chosen for ourselves.
And, you know, one thing I've encountered is I have been lucky enough to get a career with enough income to do what I need to do. You know, the fact that I can ride, like pay for a full service barn so that I can ride over lunch, that's a very privileged spot to be sitting in. And I know that not everyone may be able to address it from that direction. So the question is, okay, do you address it? I don't do well on getting up early. I just don't. I cannot do it. And it got worse after I had a kid, shockingly. So there are some people who are really early birds and they're like, oh, I ride my first horse at 5 a.m. And I'm like, that's really cool. I wish I could do that. And like, if you can do that, then you can probably board at a place that you can tack up yourself. You know, you can do that. You know, so there are different ways to get there. I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's certainly like, I would say commute is a big one. Like trying to find a place that is close to where you live is like immensely important for the longevity of your career. You know, having said that, I spent years driving an hour plus to the barn, but it was a full service training facility. So I couldn't go every day, and they rode my horse on the days I didn't go.
Right.
not just rode, but trained, you know, like,
Yeah.
so that's the other thing is, you know, my current barn, if I can't get out, they'll hack him for me. I don't ask them to do much more. They could do a little bit more, but he's very particular. So I'm just like, just hack him. And so he can get out at least. But not every horse thrives on 20 to 25 minutes either.
That's true. Somebody did ask a question similar to that. Sabrina, she said, when life gets busy, do you find it worthwhile to fit in a ride wherever you can, even if it's short?
Sounds absolutely. Like, yeah. I'm like the type of person who I'd go out and I'm such a perfectionist, like in the moment. And my poor horse, would drill him basically, especially my older horse. He and I, like, he was a character. I mean, they're both characters, but in different ways. But like my older horse, like I would be like, that half halt wasn't good enough. We're going to do this until we get a half halt that's good. And it would get worse and worse and worse. I was like, okay, we're going to take a break and then we're going to try again. So I could be out there for like 90 minutes. So, you know, and I wouldn't say that got much better with the young horse who's now 13. So he's not exactly young. And actually riding for 20 to 25 minutes forced me to be like, we're going to focus on this one thing. And by the way, you have to be warmed up first. And he's particular to warm up. So it's like I might get 5 minutes at the end of the ride to actually work on something. And then my timer would go off because I have to keep a timer. I can't.
Yep.
And I was like, you're done. And what I found was my horse came out so much mentally fresher. You know, if I rode 20 to 25 minutes, I would just get out there, get what I needed to get done. And like, sometimes it wasn't perfect, but then the next time it would be so much better. So I was like, okay. So I would say yes, absolutely. If it's only to 20 to 25 minutes, like, have a plan. I would not say skip warm up. Like, you need to skip warm up. And sometimes you have to be like, you know what? It took me 25 minutes to warm up and now I got to get off. But my horse has also been better for that. His back is better than it's ever been. He's sounder than he's ever been. He's happier than he's ever been in his work. And he's a cranky bastard. So like, he will tell me if he's cranky. And he's faster and faster and faster to warm up because he's happy and comfortable and feeling good, because I only ride him 20 to 25 minutes. I know that sounds crazy for running prelim, but like the fitness, I am very lucky that he is a thoroughbred and the fitness is not a huge deal. But I could fit him up on the weekends if I really need to, you know.
Right.
And I will say I tend to just jump a little bit on the weekdays, kind of whatever set up in the ring. I just kind of cruise through and jump and like 2 courses and I'm done, I'm off. On the weekends, I will set courses and I will be out there for a while, at least on one of the 2 weekend days, because that's the only way I can jump at height. I need to get out there and work on it. So I definitely commit to like being out there longer. I try not to like be on the horse for that long, but like I'm out there moving fences. I'm out there raising fences. Mm-hmm. I get on and get off and get on and get off as needed when he hits rails. But you know, the other thing I have to add though is for my mental state, like riding is it's the thing that brings me down. It's the thing that, like, if I'm keyed up or I'm stressed out, as soon as I get on, it's like everything else goes away. And if I don't ride for a period of time, like right now it's February and I'm going a little stir crazy because it's March. It's March and I haven't ridden since I competed in early December. And I can tell that like I'm just at an elevated sort of like, I have no patience left. I'm very stressed. Yeah. And I haven't been on my horse. Like, it's like it's like a runner's high, right? Like you just don't get that sense. And it makes a big difference in my mental happiness. So yes, I would say even for a 20 to 25 minute ride, it's worth it.
Yeah. I'm kind of the same. I agree with that. Sometimes like if I have to ride too much longer, I'm kind of like, yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing is it can make it feel less of a task. Like if you're like, oh, I have to go ride and it's 20 degrees. Like, okay, it's 20 minutes. Like, let me just get on and like do my thing and then I can get off. You know, you don't. Right. And that also goes back to time efficiency. I don't groom my horse nearly like what I did. I do still clean my tack.
Yeah.
That I'm picky about, but I try to be as quick as I can about it. I'm just a lot less picky about my horse's appearance on a daily basis. I'm like, you know what? He's fine. Like,
Yeah.
he's got blood on his butt as long as it's not in his saddle pad.
Right.
So that helps.
Yeah. Picking your battles, I guess.
Sorry?
Just like picking your battles, choosing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I do clean my tack because it's expensive. I don't want to pay for more. Yeah.
Okay. So I have a lot of questions from Lee because she is also in the field of mechanical engineering. So she was really excited about this, I think.
Oh, great.
So I tried to put them in pieces that make sense. So we'll start at the beginning. So what field of mechanical engineering are you in, and what do you look for in a job to allow you to ride and compete in the way that you want?
So this is a tough one just because, well, the first part's easy. I work in HVAC. It sounds really boring. We design heating and air conditioning for buildings. But I also am lucky enough to work for a firm that's done some pretty cool buildings. Like we've done a lot of high rises in Philly, including the 2 Comcast towers. So yeah, I get to do some pretty cool buildings. In terms of finding a company that, or I don't know if you would know your specific industry, but finding a company that company is more important, I think, than the industry itself. Engineering is a tough one because it is more conservative. It is run by older white men. It is run by boomers. They tend to cling on to their power until they are quite old, which I don't know how other industries are, but there is not a lot of youth in the upper leadership. There are a lot of generations who took advantage of their wives staying home and taking care of the children. So they don't understand why you would possibly need life balance and why can't you make it to this 7 a.m. meeting. And, that part is a little difficult.
Yeah.
I did not get along with my first company because they very much, even though they said they had flexible work hours, they did not, because I think in terms of finding it on the first interview, it's tough. I'm not going to say that like you're going to find like certain flags at the interview of like what you should run from or sign up for.
Yeah.
Because a lot of like what I got from my current company, which is fairly flexible, was like, oh yeah, we have a set schedule. And I was like, well, it's out in the suburbs, so I can make it work at least, right?
Yeah.
And turned out they were more flexible than they said they were. Whereas the other company that I didn't get along with, they said they had set hours and then they had said they had flexible hours and then they were not at all willing to be flexible. And part of that was because, at least the firms I've worked for, they are regional chains and they tend to let the partner in charge of whichever office you're in sort of run things their way. So regardless of what the handbook says, it's really up to whoever is in charge, and it's usually a white man who's old. So it's cool. I have found that like where I work currently is headquarters, so I think there was a lot more input. It wasn't just one person getting to sort of reign over a small group of people. It's like a few more people. So I think if you can find a place where it's not just one partner running a small office, that helps a lot, because you've got maybe some more. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear it. My baby is throwing it.
It's very appropriate for the subject.
Yeah, she is not happy, so I'm like getting distracted trying not to like listen to her. But in terms of, I like the HVAC industry because you can find a job anywhere.
Yeah.
I hate the HVAC industry because it is run, tends to be very conservative people, or people who just, even if they're not conservative, they just do not understand what it's like to want to do something outside of work. Their
Right.
belief is that if you're young, you should be working hard 80 hours a week into the ground and be grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, the world has changed a little bit and they're not quite they haven't quite caught up, but
Mhm.
I'd say like if you can look around in leadership and see if there's multiple leaders within one office, that's probably better because at least there's maybe some diversity of thought. If you can see if there's anyone like any women who are in decision making positions, I'm not going to say that totally helps, but it might be a good sign. I have discovered that some of the women, it depends on their age, and I feel like some of the women of that same age group, like they basically had to cut, in order to cut it, they had to basically be cut of the same cloth. And
Yeah.
but I would say my biggest advice is to not stay somewhere too long that isn't working.
Yeah.
If it's not working, you're gonna know within probably a year. And in this market, especially as an engineer, especially as a mechanical engineer, I would, if you're an HVAC, you can find another job today. I mean, if you want to move to Philly, I could hire you today. Like we're always looking for engineers because there's a drain out of the industry of the knowledge workers because the idea for the past 40 years has been grind them into the ground and it doesn't matter, there's always another one to hire, and then in the past 3 years there hasn't been another one to
Right.
hire, and so they've had to start kind of pivoting, but it's a slow, it's like poking an elephant with a stick.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think
engineers are not known for wanting to do something differently than they've done before.
this is funny. Because this is true across industries, I think. I mean, I used to work in an industry that was dominated by a very similar demographic. I worked in the oil and gas industry. And it was very similar. Like so much depended on your direct manager or their manager or the president of the company or just who it was. You know, one company is very different from another. But I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and I'll be honest that even within my group, like I'm mechanical, there's electrical and plumbing, there's project management, and there's clearly like I don't think I would have been happy in either the plumbing department or the electrical department, but my mechanical department managers are wonderful. They're still there.
Yeah.
So a lot of it just really has to do with your direct supervisor and what they're comfortable allowing, I guess.
Okay. We've still got more questions. I'll try to speed them up. Okay. I want to at least hit some from everybody. So okay.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm very talkative, so you can always tell me to, shut up and we'll move on to the next question.
I love that you're talkative because I have to talk less and everyone's appreciative of that. So okay, so how involved is your husband in the horsey side of things?
He's not horsey at all. He tries for me for shows. He will come as my groom. He is a little trepidatious about holding the horse for good reason. At least once he has been stepped on with a stud in his sneaker.
That would do it.
I didn't know how to get the horse off of him.
Yep.
I was in the ring looking for a shoe that the horse had thrown. So that was great. But he is very, he is very supportive. He tries, the best way between us for him to be supportive is for him to basically stay home and watch our daughter while I ride on the weekends. I compromise partly by making sure I ride during the weekday and not in the evenings so that he's not alone for her in the evening like he is right this second and is enjoying himself, I'm sure.
It sounds like it.
She's having a bad day. She's been having a bad week. Had to go back to daycare after we came back from vacation. She's not thrilled about it, but
I had a day last week that sounded much like that, so I totally get it. For myself, from me.
Yeah. I sometimes feel like that too, but I at least managed to retain my, my sound levels to normal decibels.
Keep it inside. We just bottle it a little bit better.
She just turned 2 a month ago, so we're hitting that stage where she's got opinions, but sometimes those opinions are just very poor opinions. You can't accommodate them. But in any case, he comes with me. What we did in the past year, and this again was the first time prior to having my child, he didn't necessarily come with me to shows. We didn't really need to. He would occasionally, but it wasn't always the most successful because he don't really like being hot. So that was, but I would say after having her, I'm very lucky that my parents retired during the pandemic, and they live in Philadelphia now. They moved from San Antonio to Philadelphia, and they're willing to watch her during a horse show. So they'll watch her at home, and my husband will come with me to the show just to like be an extra set of hands to, even though he's not horsey, he's started to learn how to clean tack. He knows he can carry, he can hold, he can hand me things. He can just like by being there, he helps with like hooking and unhooking the trailer. And again, that's not something he's familiar with, but like he's starting to learn he's starting to learn how to drive the trailer, but he doesn't, he's learning all of this after we've been together 10 years. I don't know, a long time. And he's just now learning all of this, but part of it is because we know that if he comes along, like we can half the amount of work, half the amount of time, get home quicker, and like be able to watch both of, the baby together.
Okay, I'm gonna do one more question, and then I want to bug you about the data stuff.
Okay.
So, one more on-topic question before I completely steal you away from something else. So we had Holly and Krista kind of ask similar questions about like your schedule, whether or not it changes throughout the year, and do you make any kind of calendar to help you keep track of what you need to be doing? Like, how do you keep everything organized with your rides and everything else that you have to do?
I used to be super organized about this. I mean, I lived and died by my Google Calendar, and it had everything in it, and I spent time with it, and it was my baby. Like, I was very organized. I also had lists. I actually have one key thing I should mention is do yourself a favor next time you pack for a horse show, make a list of everything you're going to take. Like make sections depending on what type of horse show, like if it's a trailer in horse show versus an away horse show, or if you have multiple horses, so you different tack, like make that list of differentiating tack, save it to your Google Drive and just print it out at every show. That's one big thing is I do that. And I did that actually, years ago, and I have used it ever since. I just print out that same show list and I cross through everything. And sometimes I'll write on the list like, okay, I need to pack this in the trailer Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And so then I just every single day leading up to the show, I like click off things, carry that list around. Nowadays, I would say I am a lot more haphazard about it. I definitely still have a Google Calendar, but I forget to check it a lot. So sometimes I forget about things that are going on, like doctor's appointments and such, until they call me and they're like, yeah, by the way, you have one tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, right. Okay. But in terms of horse shows, I've gotten more to the philosophy. I used to be very like, oh my God, the omnibus came out and I'm going to plan my entire show season and here's all the options. Now I'm lucky to live in area 2, so there's a show like almost every weekend, but sometimes it's further than I want to drive.
Yeah.
So now it's more like, okay, like I'm ready to go to a show at this level. What's near me and what dates, what kind of window will work. Sorry. This poor child is done.
She's trying to be part of this.
I know her bedroom's right behind me, but like I wouldn't have thought anyways, whatever. So she so yeah, I guess like kind of half and half. Like I'm not as on the Google Calendar anymore, and I'm definitely not as religious about scheduling everything out, but I do try to keep track of my appointments on Google Calendar. The problem is I've got my work calendar and my Google Calendar, and I don't want my personal stuff on my work stuff, and I want my work stuff on my personal. So it gets hard to keep track sometimes.
Yeah, I think we can all commiserate with that one a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. The data. We're almost near the end of our hour, but we have enough time for this. If we go a little bit over,
sure. Yeah.
So, tell us just briefly, kind of touch on a little bit of like what all you gathered data-wise when you did that stuff for Eventing Nation, because you did it to like predict performance, essentially, right? So, what all you collected, and then kind of briefly touch on like what it translated to for you as far as predicting performance.
Oh man, I wish you'd asked me before. Like I would have refreshed my memory. I haven't actually looked at my spreadsheet since like probably in like at least a year. So you'll have to bear with me here.
That's fine.
It started off obviously just doing dressage scores, cross country, rails.
Mm-hmm.
That was it.
Right.
Pretty much. It evolved into collecting stuff like I would for every event collect like I wanted to get the percentiles from each judge. I also wanted to get the seconds under for cross country. So like a lot of events, you know, if you have 0 faults, that doesn't necessarily mean you finished like right on the time, right? Like you probably finished a second or 2 or 10 or in some cases more, like even lower. And so I always wanted to get that time over or under, and over was always easy because it was based off of penalties. Under, I had to sometimes track down depending on the way they reported results, because FEI and USCA didn't show the finish times.
Right.
I always wanted optimum time from the event. I always wanted. I started getting to the point where I would say, like, okay, is this a grass show jumping or is it on footing? Is it grass dressage or is it on footing? I would. Oh, what else did I track down? I would also, take all this data and I would use it to determine. Oh, I would get the names of the 3 different judges and ideally which letter they're at, because the percentiles are almost useless if you don't have that information.
Right.
And that's what I would collect from the show itself for each rider. And each rider, when I first started this, what I had to do was go back and get a history of them. So every horse that competed in advanced, I collected the time is 2014. I collected the history back through 2012. And eventually I actually completed every single horse competing advanced. Like I would go back through their entire history, back to like whenever they started competing advanced. And of course, as time went on, the horses would retire and it was easier because I like didn't have to go back and research their old records because they were now within the realm of.
Right.
I also would go so that was for all US horses, whether they were competing in the US or overseas. Oh, I'm sorry. It was for all horses competing in the US at advanced 4-star, and 5-star.
Wow.
So whether it was just like every show, you'd collect whoever competed, so, it wasn't like I left Dom Tram out because he was Australian. Like I collected his information too, so on and so forth.
Right.
If there was a US rider overseas, I collected their information and put it in that same database. And then I also had a separate international database that it was much briefer, but I would copy and paste all the information. But I would try to go get the percentiles. I would try to get the finishing time. I tried to get as much information as I could for these international events because I wanted to be able to compare like the US riders to the, the US riders and the US events and to international like standards. I wanted to be able to rank them. In terms of like how I predicted, I had a method where I would go through and calculate it, and I would say it evolved basically over time. The initial time was just averages.
Right.
It would be like your average over the last 2 years, your finish times for that type of event. So there were some riders who were fast all the time, right? But there were some riders who were not that fast and advanced and 4-star short, but would put on the speed for long events. So like I definitely made sure that the event type matched, and I would calculate that, and then I would look at the rails and average out the rail performance. I tried to pull out any outliers, but it depends on how many horses were there. I would say I had a method. I would say that method evolved over time, and I made sure I was consistent for every show. And then I would just add up the finish score, and that was how I would predict like who would finish what. And I would say like I had some decent accuracy for a long time. I had some decent accuracy. I was pretty good about not taking into account my feelings about what should happen, and trying to just go off of what the numbers said, rank them essentially. Once we got to, I essentially created like, I don't know if you guys ever played virtual horse games on the internet when you were a kid, and they had like these stupid little horse shows. I mean, essentially it was using historical data to like create a little mini horse show in my Excel spreadsheet. I thought it was interesting because there were people who patterns wouldn't hold, and there were people who just, it was clear there was a pattern. 5-star dressage, I think, is heads and tails harder than 4-star, and I could see it for certain horses and certain riders. It wasn't for everyone. Sometimes it was pretty sometimes it was pretty similar, but there were certain pairs who predictably scored worse at 5-star. And everyone would be hyping them up coming in, and I'd be like, no, I don't think that's gonna happen. So it was just interesting to do that. I was to say like I could tell you all of the data that I collected over the years without. Honestly, I wish you'd mentioned it beforehand, because I would have refreshed my memory. But
I get it.
I have so much
data, I believe that.
And so many different patterns I chased. I would look for things like, okay, horse falls, like one of the last things I looked at that I never actually ended up. I wish I had kind of chased this rabbit down this hole a little bit more. But I just.
That's going to be my next question. Is if you saw any trends with safety or fall data or anything like that.
I did. Right before the pandemic started, I wrote an opinion piece, a pure opinion. It was not data related at all. It was just purely emotionally based. I don't know if everyone remembers, but there was a young woman who died at Rocking Horse about 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. And it kind of followed this this trend where there's like 4 or so youngish women, under 50, who had died in cross-country schooling accidents, warm up, on course, so on and so forth. And it didn't feel like anything was happening. We weren't getting information released. There was no information about why any of these were happening. There was no accident reports. There was no safety reports. There was no safety. There was no follow-up. It happened. It was very sad, but then there was no reasons why being released. So no one could learn from it. No one could protect themselves in such a way by making steps to mitigate maybe something that they're doing that was similar to the person who made those decisions, and it came down to the riders and the people involved in sports say, well, sometimes people miss. And it's like, yes, but if you're training someone and someone misses, you don't just say, oh, well, you missed, right? Like there's other factors, including the horse you're mounted on, the decisions you've made leading up to the event, this pace you've chosen to take, there's just more to it. And it got a lot of response, and I got some blowback from the powers that be, that they weren't happy that I wrote this without, don't you know that we have a lot of don't you know everything we do? And they're like, we fill out an accident report. And I was like, okay, so do the people who fill out this incident report, do they get any training on how to properly interview witnesses? And no, of course not.
Yeah.
They didn't really want to hear what I had to say.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of years trying to say things at Eventing Nation.
Yeah.
And no one really seemed to want to hear what I had to say. I didn't mind that because I had an outlet to say what I wanted to say. I had to give it up, obviously, because of time suck.
Yeah.
And I loved having that Eventing Nation family, but I couldn't do it anymore. Having said that, there were a few times when I found some trends that I was concerned about. And towards the end, I found a trend, and I wish I'd gone down this rabbit hole, the show jumping thing, the rails, and that being related to safety came up. Now, I had a horse at Advanced who, he was very casual in the stadium.
Mm-hmm.
I never had a fear on him cross country. I've known, there's been many other horses, like you got Tipperary Admin. He was not a great show jumper. You had Rolling Stone, who was not a great show jumper. There are many horses out there we have seen historically who have been fantastic cross-country horses and not great show jumpers.
Yeah.
Most of those horses had not fallen down cross-country. However, there were some horses all the time that I was always like, oh no, they entered another advanced, or they entered another 4-star, or they entered another 5-star. And I was like, that horse is going to fall down again. Again. Not like for the first time, not the second time, like again.
Yeah.
Most of those horses were very good show jumpers.
That's interesting.
And towards the end of like my data collection, I did actually do kind of some studies to see if to the horses who fell down multiple times at this level, what their show jumping record looked like. And I actually found that the horses with the worst show jumping records, look, maybe they were having stops cross country, maybe they were retiring because and those were usually the riders weren't prepared. Maybe they were jumping clear and fast all the time, but they weren't falling down. The ones who were falling down were the excellent show jumpers. And of course, not all of the excellent show jumpers were falling down.
Right.
But the ones that were falling down multiple times, every time out, or often out, were excellent show jumpers. And I could name you 4 off the top of my head, but I'm not going to because I really don't want to bring that up.
I can think of a couple off the top of my head.
There's at least a couple still competing and still worrying me.
Yeah.
I don't pay attention as much as I used to because I did have to kind of emotionally detach myself. I mean, I cared so much about the sport. I cared so much about high performance. I cared so much about what made sense for people to be competing at the top level in terms of safety. And I was getting turned away. I mean, I had people be like, I'd be like, I want to be involved in the safety committee. No, I want to be involved in providing data to the USEA. No, they were open to when I wanted to correct, I would actually contact the USEA when records were incorrect, when rider falls were recorded, when horse falls were recorded as rider falls, which happened quite frequently, but it never got fixed. It happened. Right. It continued to happen over and over and over again. And they were very, I will give them this. They were very concerned about this. They wanted to make sure that the records were correct, but they wouldn't follow up with the TDs. They wouldn't follow up with the event officials, and those patterns continued. So they were always happy to correct it after the fact, but it was a problem that persisted quite badly.
I remember that being a discussion. Yeah.
I had to stop caring a bit. Unfortunately, I had to stop paying attention, and I had to disconnect myself a little bit from the high performance side of it and the spectating side of it, in terms of being a super fan. Yeah. A super, it used to be Kentucky was like, I took vacation days just to watch Kentucky or badminton, and I don't do that now. I just can't do it anymore. Yeah. I enjoy watching the WAG, but I can't engage the way I want to. And I felt like the politics of everything was, becoming too much. So
that's
yeah, I just thought that was interesting though. There's the really, really good jumpers, and what would happen is they peck on landing and they face plant, or they doubt themselves. They're nervous and they doubt themselves and they second guess themselves in front of a jump, and it doesn't go well.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense if you think about it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and then honestly, their realm is show jumping, and at least one of them was sold on actually a while back as a show jumper. I saw profiled in the Chronicle of the Horse, so that was good. But most of the time it seems like people keep trying because they're such good jumpers, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah. No,
I think people need to understand that it's not just form. Like, you can have a horse who jumps amazing, but if they doubt themselves in front of a cross-country fence, I don't want to ride it.
No.
I don't want a horse that second guesses themselves on cross-country. I want a horse that is a cocky bastard and is like, no, I know exactly what I'm doing here. Because they're confident enough, and then if they make a mistake, that mistake is at least in one direction or another and not in both directions at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. This is something I feel like we could talk about for like a whole nother hour, because
I know, and I feel so strongly about things.
I mean, I come at the data nerd thing. I like my whole data collection company is about breeding data, so it's like trying to identify trends there with event horses, because it on the surface it looks like there's not one. And I've been doing this for like 4 years, and I'm just now starting to see there is definitely there's definitely
it takes about 4 years of pattern of data collection before you can start to see patterns, which is part of why I also went international to try to collect data, because I wanted to broaden my data set beyond just U.S. horses, because there wasn't enough data sets within, and even I wanted to study different events against each other, and it's like impossible. Like, to some extent, Area 6, I was never going to get there because there's not enough competitors to create large enough data sets to get really good data out of. So it was going to take decades, really. And I was like, I just can't commit. It was a lot of time.
It's extraordinarily time consuming.
Yeah. And I had this idea for a while that I would become like a worldwide like data expert, and then Echo Ratings came along, and they're so good at marketing, and they had a whole team, and they were prepared. I didn't have, like, I'm not bad. So they were lovely people. Like, we worked together, we collaborated a bit, but ultimately, like, I couldn't compete essentially with what they offered. So that was part of it too. It was like, well, I'm crowded. There's no point in my space anymore.
Right.
But
that's interesting, because you predate Echo Ratings, so it's like
I predate Echo Ratings. Yeah. I do predate Echo Ratings. Well, publicly, apparently they'd been collecting data before me, so they've been preparing, right? But I just came right out and was like, I'm doing this now, and like I had no idea what I was doing, and just kind of was like, I'm gonna do this. I won a blogger contest at Eventing Nation, so here we are. But and it turned out to be a great period of my life. I worked really, really closely with Jenny Autry while she was the editor-in-chief, and I worked really, really closely with Wiley, and then Leslie Wiley, and then I also worked closely with Sally, and they've all been incredible people in my life. Like, I can't say how much I enjoyed working for them and having a platform to have a voice. I know we're completely off topic of being an amateur, but I think that's part of it, is as an amateur, you don't often feel like you get a voice that is amplified.
No, for real. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of pros in this industry who feel it's a bubble, right? The industry is a bubble. We know that. Yeah. But the amateurs are outside of the bubble half their time. 3/4 of their time, however much of their time, they're outside of the bubble. And we know how insular, because we're outside of the bubble, we can see how insular that community is, and we can see how, like, a little bit self-fulfilling their prophecies become, because they really believe in their expertise to some extent. And again, this goes back to the safety thing. I asked on the safety committee, do you guys have any safety experts? And they go, oh, well, we have top writers and we have doctors and we have engineers and I'm like, no, I'm talking about like literally someone whose job is to like investigate safety accidents. Like you've got examples like the National Transportation Safety Board, you've got OSHA, like there are actually people out there who are experts in creating safety investigations. Have you ever engaged any of them? And they're like, well, we have all these people we know, and it's like they just don't even understand that there's jobs out there that they've never even fathomed that could actually help with the sport.
Right.
And when often, you try to engage them on it, there's sort of like this attitude of, well, you're an amateur and you don't know.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was about to say, is often when an amateur does speak up, they're completely disregarded,
Yeah. It's true. And, that kind of goes back to the dynamic of between the AMI and the coach. Like, there is this dismissive attitude, I think, of AMI sometimes. You're not working hard enough. You're not spending every day riding your horse. You're not cleaning your tack every day. You're not out here every day. And it's like, yeah, because I can't.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I'm not an expert in a completely different topic than you are.
Right.
And there is a dynamic between the trainer and the student that is a power dynamic where the trainer is above the student, no matter their age group or their expertise in other topics. But it is, once you disengage from that, it is interesting to me, because I have noticed that pros tend to be, they don't understand what it's like. Like I mentioned with the vacation time, they don't understand the constraints that are put on amateurs, and they don't understand to some extent what it's like to see the amateurs that they normally see as students as not underlings, but their power dynamic is they're above you because they're training you. They don't have a reference point for seeing you as an expert in something else that they may not be an expert in.
Right.
So it's an odd dynamic.
Yeah.
I think England manages it a bit better. They seem to understand a little bit more how to create a sport that is more accessible to amateurs. Yes. I think the one-day events help a lot. I think the spread out schedules of the events are getting more and more challenging.
Yeah.
And prevalent. Now there's more events on Fridays and Thursdays, and it's like, guys, like, making the sport less accessible.
Right.
But I haven't seen much. Well, even I've actually had this issue, and I'm going to say it right now. Intermediate. I'd love to run intermediate again, but as a one-day event for me, even in Area 2, they're everywhere, but they also run intermediate on Saturdays, and you pretty much go back to back to show jumping to cross country.
Yeah.
Your dressage ride is probably at 8 a.m. So you've done all the work to get there for your 8 a.m. ride time. You don't have time to walk cross country before you ride. And by the way, it's intermediate, so you probably want to walk cross country more than once.
Yeah.
So that means and they're always on Saturday. They're never on Sunday. They never run the intermediate on Sunday morning. So that means you have to take a day off of work to go walk cross country, to drive wherever it is to walk cross country the day before. But cross country doesn't open until 3 p.m. for walking on Friday. So now you have to go at 3 p.m. to walk your course. And when you're driving home, you're hitting you're hitting, Philadelphia, New York, DC traffic.
Right. Yeah.
And there's no good period to walk your course.
Yeah.
And every single event wants to run intermediate first thing on Saturday. And I'm like, why? Why can't you offer some events that do it on Sunday? Hey.
Right.
But no one thinks of that. Like, no one's like, well, there's so few amateurs going intermediate. And you're like, yeah, because
you've made it more difficult.
Because you made it very difficult. So there's a lot of like, well, because we don't have to cater to this group for this level, we're not going to. And it's like, yeah, but this goes back to somewhat to diversity as well. Like if you don't make something accessible to people, they're not going to participate, and then you're going to say, well, I don't have to cater to them because they aren't really participating.
Right. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is difficult to be an amateur.
Yeah. Anyway, great wrap up, Maggie. Great.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, we're 20 minutes over. I feel terrible.
I know, it's okay. It's been a great discussion, and I still feel like we've barely even hit the tip of it because.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to get a refresh on the data. If you wanted to, I could refresh my memory on the data, and we could probably have a whole other hour on that. Because it certainly wasn't the only thing. I mean, I went down the rabbit hole on a lot of things, including I actually got to the point where I could tell you which dressage judges at the 5-star level were like maybe a little generous towards their own country people, but like, man, I chased some rabbits, man. Like that was fun, but.
Yeah, I understand. I chase a lot of rabbits too, following them, breeding rabbit holes. So.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I have an idea for a new rabbit hole.
All the time.
How many hours of my life will it take?
Yeah, 6 hours later, you're like bleary-eyed and crazy, and you're like, what just happened? You know?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. But right, I will say that it gave me some great Excel skills to translate to my current job. So it all relates back to itself.
Good point. That's a life skill. Yeah.
Excel is a life skill. Let that be the lesson.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me.
Yeah.
It's been really great.
Thank you guys for having me. I did not, I wasn't sure why, I don't know. I didn't know if I had anything helpful for anyone, but I hope someone took something out of this.
For sure. I think so. It's really interesting. It's always interesting to hear other people's perspectives too, because like we're all in the same boat, but we're all kind of doing it a little bit differently. So it's always interesting to me to hear how other people are doing it. So I think it'll be helpful and interesting. So yeah.
I think there's always a way to do it, but there's always a choice to make about it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, Maggie, and thank everybody that's been watching.
Thank you guys. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. See you guys next week.